Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Adam Boyd. He's a law enforcement professional, former SWAT, and he's going to talk about Wim Hof. And so if you know about Wim Hof, if you know, you know, and if you don't, you're like, WTF is that? But stand by. We're going to be talking about all that good, kind of scary stuff for a lot of us, like cold exposure, breath work. It's pretty fascinating. So stand by, start going down the little rabbit holes where all the stuff you can learn following this episode. But without further ado, Adam, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, man. So when you reached out and started sharing, kind of what your forte is, like your specialized training on Wim Hof, I was like, okay, man, that's awesome because, we've talked about breath work. We've talked about a lot of these different stress reduction and health promoting modalities on the show. And I will say I have dabbled in cold exposure. I've never gone like full bore, but there was a stint where I was pretty routine about doing the cold showers. I would do a dip, if I was out and about. If you want to scroll way back in the Insta, whether it's snow or whether it's like a super cold lake, I was down for it, just because, it's a mental fortitude builder. But yeah, we'll get into that. But Adam, if you can tell the audience about your entry into police work, a little bit about your career and the things you did there.
Yeah, so I started in law enforcement in 2011. Just like everybody else, I started on patrol. I moved over into investigations about 5 years into my career, where I specialized in domestic violence, crimes against women and children.
Mm-hmm.
More specifically, I ended up specializing even further down that rabbit hole into strangulation. It became such an issue for the community that I work that they needed somebody who was actually able to investigate that a little bit more in depth. I worked very, very closely with our SANE unit, which I know is very typical, where they do like sexual assault. For those that don't know, SANE starts for like sexual assault nurse examiner. What they realized is they took a faction of those nurses and put them through a special school, just like I did, to specifically go through strangulation. And then while I was a detective, SWAT opened up, and it was something that was interesting me throughout my career. So I tested for our SWAT team and ended up getting selected, spent several years on that. And that's really where like this wellness journey started. I've always been, like an athlete. Like I've been an ultra runner for, longer than my law enforcement career, and like eating well and things like that. Well, my SWAT commander was like, hey man, I would love for you to like start putting together some workouts for our guys and whatnot. And I was like, well, I don't really know much about training anybody. So like a week later in my inbox, I got a strength and conditioning cert that he sent me. And he was like, hey, if I think you should really consider going to get certified. So I got certified in that. And then I went through a nutrition course, and then Arizona Post physical fitness instructor. And it just kind of like kept snowballing. It was like one thing after another, where I started learning different modalities of wellness. And then one day, one of my buddies on the team was like, hey, I'm going to this thing. I don't really know what it is. He had no clue, right? And I'm like, I don't know what it is either. And he's like, well, it has something to do with health. So like, do you want to go? And I was like, oh yeah, let's do it, So I go to this class, and it's taught by a retired Navy SEAL. And he's sharing like his story about TBI and like how this method saved his life. And then he puts up like brain scans on the screen. And he's like, I did like a study where like I had my before and after. And, I'm not a neurosurgeon or like, whatever. I don't know how to read those things, but I can tell the colors were definitely different, right? Like,
very different. Okay. Yeah.
I'm smart enough to see different colors.
Yeah. Welcome to smart cops. Yeah.
So that was kind of like, I was like, wow, that, this is, not only did I feel good after the class, but I was like, this really does work. Because I left that day and I was like, oh my God, like, is this how normal people feel? Like, this is amazing. Like, I want to feel like this all the time. So I started practicing the method. And then, my wife noticed like the changes in me, and she's like, our relationship got better. And then I kind of hit a point where I was like, I need to start teaching this to other people. So I went and got certified as a Wim Hof instructor.
Nice, nice. So I'm gonna rewind a little bit. Well, first off, like Wim Hof, that's a dude's name, first and last
Yes.
name. Some of his claims to fame, I believe, were summiting Everest in like board shorts. Is that right? And then,
I think it
um,
was Kilimanjaro. Did
okay,
he do
so
Everest? He might have done Everest too. He's
okay, I don't know.
yeah.
He's a crazy man, a crazy impressive man. And then he got injected with some virus. You know about that one? Basically, to demonstrate his immune system, like how strong it was to fight off this infectious disease or something.
Yeah, that's actually what put Wim on the map was this endotoxin study. So they injected him, with the E. coli virus, and
Mm,
it's a dead virus, so like, that's what an endotoxin is. And basically, what's supposed to happen is you're going to get all the symptoms of being sick without actually being in any real danger. So you're going to get the fever and the chills and all the stuff that goes along with it. And he was like, I can activate my immune system using this method, and I won't get sick. And scientists were like, whatever, crazy man. Like,
yeah,
and they injected him with the endotoxin, and lo and behold, nothing happened. And they're like, okay, well, now you're just a freak of nature, an anomaly. And he was like, no, I can teach this to anybody. And they
mm,
went back and redid the study with a group of random people, and they had a control group, and kind of the same thing happened. They taught they taught half this group the method, and the other half didn't do anything. And then they injected them all with the endotoxin. And the study happened exactly how Wim said it was going to happen. Everybody who practiced this method either didn't get sick or had a dampened response. And then the group that didn't practice it at all got sick, as predicted. And that's really what put Wim on the map. And his cold exposure kind of took off. But I think we really forget that breathwork and mindset are two big components of that method. They just don't look sexy on Instagram.
yeah, yeah. Then I mean, that's a lot of what we talk about on the show is like the stuff that is pretty pedestrian, right? Very accessible. It's a slow start. It doesn't have to be the crazy stuff. Like you don't have to be, breaking up the ice this winter out in your backyard and plunge in and do breath work. You can start with things that Adam's going to talk about today. So I love, also to rewind back, I love that you do have that background in health and staying active, right? You mentioned you're an ultra runner, which you're an absolute masochist when you do that kind of stuff. So hats off to you, not for me. Um, but you have that basis, and then you also recognize, okay, well, I don't know about this thing, and it's pretty cool that you had somebody that was nudging you to go explore that other facet, to kind of round yourself out, maybe for things health and fitness, and then you took on this other thing and this other thing, and now you have this wealth of information. And I could see how a lot of these things can interact and even promote the understanding of the next one.
Yeah, I mean, health is really just intertwined. We need to focus on, our physical health. So, like, sleep helps that, right? Stress helps our physical health, but vice versa. Our mental health allows us to heal physically and be, healthier physically. So everything's just intertwined. Whether it's sleep, nutrition, working out, meditation, breath work, social connection. All of these things are really what creates like this circle of wellness. And we can't just practice one thing. If you just ate right and did nothing and then didn't manage your stress, you would still be unhealthy to a degree.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like that's where Wim like kind of crossed me over into like that holistic wellness space. Because I was like, okay, well, I'm doing these things correctly, but I'm not doing this correctly. And then once I started to incorporate all of these modalities into my life, things really started to change for me.
Yeah. I love that. And I'm also curious, with you having that endurance background, that extreme endurance background, and having assignment and experience with SWAT, when you started doing the strength and conditioning cert, were there any light bulbs that popped off for you that was like, man, I wish more people that are cardio bunnies, or cardio junkies, whatever you want to say, in law enforcement or first responder work, I hope that they start accessing strength and conditioning in this way for these reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it was really through not only my training but experience of like starting to get injured. So the more miles I was putting on, you start to realize like, yeah, maybe there's some other things at play here. And that was you guys said the light bulb goes off where I was like, oh, I am really kind of screwing the pooch on this. Where I need to be strength training more. I need to be working on mobility, agility, because while cardio is great, I would not recommend ultra running for most first responders. If it's an interest of yours, great.
Yeah.
But if it's not, you do need cardiovascular health, but you could do it in the form of swimming, running, cycling, playing basketball. There's a ton of different ways to get cardio. And 30 minutes a couple times a week is really all that's necessary.
Yeah.
But the strength training and making sure that your body can move and function in a real emergency capacity is so important. So I was able to start ramping up the way I was training in a little bit different manner, because running 100 miles doesn't translate into, kicking in a door and raiding a house or like, all the things that you can do on a SWAT team. And so I really had to change the way I trained.
Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And my typical response with cardio is like, yeah, we could just lift weights faster, right? Like the total meathead thing. But no, like good points. I love how you even point out and underline the injury prevention, right? Durability. And I think that's where most people that are maybe a little bit more varied in their approach to fitness, that's where they would certainly underline the importance of strength training. Like, hey, for people that don't want to get bulky, it's not about that. It's just about strengthening your ligaments, your tendons as well, right? Your bone density for the aging population. And let's just say, hey, if you're past middle age, like start thinking about that stuff before it becomes too late. And shoot, cops, a lot of times it's just popping out of the car, maybe a foot pursuit, but maybe just like literally trying to hustle from here to there, tripping on a curb and then busting up your knee, something like that.
Yeah, and the strength training and making sure that you're being healthy overall, like is going to help your recovery. So, even we see it in professional athletes, like they get injured. Like
Mm-hmm.
injury can be part of the game, and they're probably the most well-trained genetic freaks like out there. So
Yeah.
if they're getting injured, like it's a pretty good possibility that we all have the risk of it. What helps you is like that mindset and that physical fitness, just like they say muscle memory. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna get healthier faster, not healthier. You're gonna recover faster from that
Yeah.
injury. So, and I think one of the things that people don't realize is that like when you get injured, they just want to lay on I hurt my ankle, I want to lay on the couch, and it's like, no, we need to make sure that we're moving, we're strengthening the muscles and tendons around that injury so we can come back faster and better.
I love that. No, thanks for that deviation. I got super excited about some of the things you shared. Um, to also cut back to what you said, so after you went through that initial Wim Hof training, you relayed that your wife noticed some differences right away. And so, how long was that training, and what are some of the things you attribute that to?
I mean, the ice baths boost your mood, and so does the breath work. And what I was doing, I was starting every day off on a positive note. So I wasn't allowing that stress from the previous day to roll into the next morning. I would start fresh every morning with about 15 minutes of breath work and an ice bath. And you get that dopamine boost, you're reducing your stress. And then it's kind of allowing me to perceive the world in a different way instead of being inundated like law enforcement first responders are, just negative, negative, negative all day, every day. And it was like, no, I got a fresh start every day. So I would practice my breath work, do the ice bath, go to work. And then when I would come home, I may take like 3 to 5 minutes to do an additional breath work technique that's not Wim's. And it allowed me to go into the house, not carry the day's stress with me, and actually be a good partner.
Yeah, that's such a good anecdote, and I think that that's so important because people can hear that stress reduction, sure, sure, health guru, sure, sure, but then no, this is Adam. You've already heard about his assignments, right? This is very, these intimate crimes that can affect a lot of us very personally. We can carry that trauma, and it can rub off on us in these ways, especially with you being an investigator. You're working directly with these victims and these seeing these terrible things happen to folks, working with the SANE nurses, right? So um, I think the proof is in the pudding when we hear it from somebody like you that's seen both sides, right? The investigative load and the stress there, as well as the tactical, physiological stress that we all can be aware of from this first responder work that we do.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we just need to take more seriously. I mean, I think the average age of a heart attack in a law enforcement officer is 46 years old. And that is, I mean, just very eye opening.
Mm-hmm.
46 is, I mean, I'm 43 right now, and I'm like, I can't imagine like having a heart attack at 46 years old. But the lifestyle between like the late nights, we know that graveyard shifts is extremely unhealthy for us. And then it's what's open late. So we're eating it in and out, or whatever's open 24 hours. And then you add the stress in, and then you're tired when you get home. So you don't want to cook a good meal or get a workout in. Like it just starts compounding over your career. And we need to do a better job of, even if it's like 10 minutes, every day, just figuring out like something we can do for our health. And that's really what I built like my entire business on, was what can we do in less than 20 minutes? Because if I, let's hypothetically say 30 minutes of breath work, 30 minutes of lifting, and 30 minutes of yoga is like the most optimal workout routine we can get, hypothetically. Mm-hmm. Well, that's 90 minutes. And I can't expect somebody who doesn't do anything for their health to just all of a sudden be doing 90 minutes worth of something.
Yeah, a lot of people just wrote you off, right? Like if you're like,
right.
this is the magic elixir, and you're like, yeah, I don't have that time, which I would also argue you probably do, more days than not. But to your point, yeah, absolutely. Like it's a lot. It can feel very daunting.
So like I figured this out when I was training for a 100-miler. I'm working collateral duty at SWAT. I'm an investigator, and my daughter was just born, and I was like, I made a deal with myself, and I was like 20 minutes every day, no matter what, just something for my well-being, 20 minutes, no matter what. And what that really helped me do is build a habit, because that's really the issue we're dealing with when it comes to our health. Is like, we can talk about optimization and the best training modality all we want, but if you're doing nothing, that's an even bigger issue. Like start walking, throw in some broccoli with your cheeseburger, like start doing little things to build the habits. And that's really how we're going to create success and change in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So on that, we're talking about Wim Hof. What are some of the things that you would encourage people to start with, right? Like they're hooked right now, but it does sound daunting. Like, man, we're talking about breath work. I don't even know how to approach that. We're talking about cold exposure. That sounds uncomfortable. Where would you start?
I would start with the cold exposure. I would start with cold showers. That's the easiest way to do it. If you live in Arizona like I do, summertime's a little challenging to get water cold enough. But there's some of the other misconceptions about the cold. Like we don't need 32-degree water. It needs to be under 59 degrees really to start getting benefits. So if you can do a cold shower just for 30 seconds, 1 minute, again, we're just building on that habit. Like, if you want to jump into like, I want to do 10 minutes worth of ice baths, like I'm just not going to have you run a half marathon if you've never done it before. So we're going to build adaptation slowly. I've spoken with several chiefs around the country that have had to send people to the hospital because their guys have like gone like 20, 30 minutes in ice bath. And now you're dealing with the after drop and hypothermia. And this is one of those practices where more is not better. So all you need is maybe 30 seconds to a minute to start, work your way up to 2 to 5 minutes of exposure. And then this is what I do. If I start to feel like I'm becoming adaptive, I just take a break and find something new that is difficult to do for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that a lot of us first responders, once we get bit by the commitment of something, then we do go full bore, right? And that's where the person that's undertrained, well-intended, but jumping into maybe the non-ideal CrossFit with a non-ideal coach is like broken 2 weeks later because they didn't toggle in, right? Or, hey, ultra running sounds really cool. This Adam dude sounds really cool. Like I'm gonna get a new pair of sneakers and get after it, right? And the next day you're not walking, right? Like we gotta start small, right? It's about the long game, and to the point of longevity, something we talk about a lot. Like how do we thrive through our career? How do we thrive into retirement? Not just survive. I love that, right? So even this on the cold showers, I've seen this where you can make up your own setup, but I've also seen products where you can hook like this little bucket on top of your shower head and put ice in it so that you can, if you're in a hot area, right, in the summertime, like that's probably a pretty easy way that you can get some colder water pretty quickly.
Yeah, and there's a ton of different ways you can do it. I initially bought a chest freezer
Mm,
because cold plunges are kind of expensive. So
yeah,
if you want to use, go all out, I use a Morosco. They're amazing. They're very expensive. They're like the Ferrari of cold plunges. But I was like, damn, this is the best thing I've ever done. When I started this journey, I was like, I'll go on OfferUp. I bought a chest freezer because I didn't know how long I was going to practice this, right? Like,
sure, yeah,
you start some things and it was like 125 bucks, something like that. I went to Home Depot, got some marine sealant, filled it with water, plugged it in overnight, bam, cold water for like a week. And then, as you progress, you start getting into like nicer stuff and things like that. So yeah, start cold showers and then make it cheap on yourself till you're going to actually stay with the practice and then, move on from there.
yeah. That's a good point, right? Let's not get the well, what is the Ferrari, or like what are the top tier cold plunges running at? Just so people are like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to jump to that right now. Maybe
The
one day.
Yeah, the Morosco, I think their lower one starts at like 13.9.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
yeah,
another great
a pretty
company
paycheck.
in Arizona here that's called Desert Plunge. They don't have a bunch of the bells and whistles that does, but they're a great company. They're a great product, and I think they're around 3,400. Then you go down to like the chest freezer. I bought a stock tank, from Tractor Supply,
Yep.
like 125 bucks.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going the long game, you got to think about like how much ice costs. So
Yeah.
you're like, dang, 3,400 bucks. It seems like a lot, but ice $30 a day adds up over a long period of time.
Yeah, and it's the hassle. You got to go to the store and get all this ice, and like
Yeah,
it's annoying to carry like 4 or 5 bags of ice. And you're gonna do it
and,
all the time.
and those two are just companies I've dealt with personally. There's a lot of great companies out there, so like I don't get like a kickback from either of those two. I'm just giving you my personal example.
Yeah.
Go find what works for you within your budget, and that's just yeah, whatever works for you and your family is a great way to be. Great way to
Yeah.
start.
Are there tips? I mean, safety tips if you're gonna do something with an ice freezer, or sorry, a chest freezer that you got to do before you fill this thing up with water and hop in because you are plugging this thing in. Are there general guides that you would refer people to?
Yeah, I mean, you can go on YouTube and figure it out, but definitely seal it so the water is not getting into the electrical components. And obviously, unplug it before you get in, so that way you don't have any
There you go.
electricity generating through
All right, you heard it here. Be safe. Be safe, folks. We're telling you to be very, very safe. For the ones that are not, let's say, not uh electrified, not electronic. So like, let's take your tank. General tips that you're aware of for maintaining this water that's just sitting out, right? How do we keep this thing clean? How do we keep all these things from growing in it potentially?
it. I mean, you could treat it like you could attach a filter to it, just like you would a pool. Add the chlorine, the bromine. You could inject some ozone into it. There's a bunch of different ways. The easiest way is just to empty it out frequently.
Hmm.
So if you're going to use a stock tank, use it for a couple of days, empty it out, refill it. And, we want to make sure we keep that water clean because it does get gross after a little while. So
Yeah.
you'll start noticing it's a little murky and you're like, okay, now it's time to dump this stuff out. That's kind of the benefit also of the higher end ones is because they generally come with like a filter and a chiller. So like you don't really have to worry about that as much. It just kind of cycles through. Just like, if I use like because it's outside and it has a cover, but I'll use like a skimmer like I would on a pool.
Hmm.
You get all the stuff out of it, but the water stays really nice just because it does have a filter and it does have the ozone in it.
Yeah. Awesome. I've heard some things that, for those that, again, us alpha types or us like driven types, oftentimes we go full bore. I've heard some proponents of the idea of not doing like an ice bath all the time if you want to have the benefit of your muscle repair or you want to tear it and for muscle build. You have thoughts on that, or just food for thought for people to think about how frequently they may want to go like full ice bath?
Yeah, so remember it's a tool. And it does inhibit the muscle growth process. So like if your goal is strength hypertrophy, you don't want to go from workout to ice bath. you're going to get the benefits of the ice bath, but you're not going to get the benefits of the workout. So if you're going to do it on the same day, I would probably do the ice bath prior to the workout, because you're also going to get a boost of those, stress hormones, right? Like your cortisol, your epinephrine, norepinephrine is going to start rising. So you can actually see some performance increases if you do it beforehand, but you will have negative effects for your workout if you do it afterwards.
Yep. Awesome. Well, no, I appreciate that, because I think a lot of us, we do get inspired by pro athletes, and then they're hitting the tank, right? Like right after, all the time. But we got to remember how they're doing 2-a-days, or they got a game like multiple days in a row. So yeah, their goal is not to build muscle in season. Whereas your goal, it may or may not, right? So consider all your modalities, consider your context. I think you put it so well there. For those, I think but we'll just transition to this question, because you brought up the point that it can raise cortisol. So would you agree that it's probably not the best for people to do at the end of their day before they're trying to go to bed? Have you seen it affect people different ways?
I have seen it affect people different ways, and I've actually played with this like myself. So as a general rule, I probably wouldn't do it before you go to bed. But there were times where I was dealing with so much stress and anxiety that I literally hopped out of bed at 11 o'clock at night to get into the cold tub. And then I came back in 20 minutes later, I was asleep, because it helped my
Wow.
stress levels.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't recommend that as a general practice. So give yourself at least a couple hours to come down off the dopamine and the cortisol spikes. Here's the cool thing about the hormone spikes. They're generally pretty short. So one of the things that I think a lot of people get wrong when it comes to cold exposure is they want to get in and they just want to suffer through it, like it's making them tougher. And that's not the goal of the cold exposure. The goal is to learn how to relax your physiology and control your own stress response. And that's really how we start building that hormetic stress and building that mental resilience. If we're getting in and just suffering, we're just teaching ourselves to suffer. But if we get in and we're trying to relax the breath and to relax the mind, then that's when the mental resilience and that hormetic stress from like the cellular level starts to build. And what that does when you get out is the dopamine stays high for a fairly long time. So you're going to be in a good mood. But the spikes you have in the epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol actually decrease fairly quickly. So it's something that you definitely don't want to practice right before bed, but like fairly safe around dinner time. If you go to bed at 10 o'clock and you want to practice around 5, 6, you're pretty good to go as far as that is. But yeah, as a general rule, I wouldn't practice right before bed unless you feel like you really need it. Like if it's affecting your sleep quality.
Yeah. Yeah. Know thyself. I love that you gave that example where it worked for you in that situation, but generally, I've heard similar, right? And it wasn't until last few years where I heard that actually taking a warm or hot shower before bed could be nice. And I was like, wait, doesn't that, counter or contradict some of the idea that you should sleep in a cooler environment? And then I heard, well, your body is cooling after that, that warm, hot bath, as long as you don't bundle up and, three layers of covers where your body stays hot, that could help, right? So depends on the person, right?
Yeah, and I would probably go a couple different routes before I went to the ice bath. You could practice a down regulation breath technique. You could journal to get whatever's off your mind. Try a hot shower, getting off your phone. Like I would do like probably a ton of different things before I would resort to the ice bath.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. You said it just a little bit ago, right? Where the goal is to learn to relax and get yourself into that relaxation mode, control your stress response. So is there, and I've heard it different ways, so what are your thoughts on, your beginner into the cold shower per se? So morning time, I'm psyching myself up, or maybe I shouldn't be psyching myself up. Do I do some breath work prior? Do I do some breath work once I'm inside? What are your recs?
So when it comes to the Wim Hof breath technique, it's something you want to separate from the cold exposure practice. They are completely separate. One of the issues that we have because Wim's breath technique is an upregulation technique. So what I'm trying to do is stress myself out with my breath, and then I'm going to learn how to control my stress response using my mindset. But because it's an upregulation technique, it can create some dizziness. There's a potential for people to pass out. One of the other things that practitioners learn is that you can hold your breath for a really long time. So if you're in the ice bath or you go into the pool, like people want to hold their breath, like, oh, I can hold my breath for a minute and a half, 2 minutes now. And what that does is they could potentially cause themselves a shallow water blackout and drown. So I just want to draw that line with Wim's technique is not to be done in the water. What you want to do, in whether it's a cold shower or in the ice bath, is learn how to slow your breath and relax. So nice smooth breaths in and out, because that stress, if we do this, right, like we start to get amped up, what is that going to do to our physiology? It's going to ramp it up. But
yeah, you're tightening up, right?
right. So when it's going to signal to our body that we're stressed. So like, sprinting does the same thing. It's a stress response. And we want to be able to control that response. And that's the idea behind the cold exposure, is to have an external stressor hit us. And then we're like, we got this. I can learn how to relax my mind and my breath during this practice. And again, that's how we build that mental resilience that goes with it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when you're talking about Wim's technique, and if you YouTube it, or you start looking at some of this stuff after the show, you're going to see that rapid breathing, right? Like I think is it the method or one of the methods called Breath of Fire?
Yeah, it's a little bit different. So when you really break down breath, there's two types of breath work. It's up regulation and down regulation. And they do all of them do very similar things. So Breath of Fire just has a different sequence than Wim's method.
Oh, it's different. Okay.
It's a little bit, but that hard breath in and out. The way Wim's is a little different is there's a breath hold that goes with it. And we're also kind of have a little bit of down regulation that goes in conjunction with the rapid breathing. So the way Wim's method really works is like we start with, like, if you came to a workshop or I brought it to your agency, we would talk about like how to utilize our mind, like some different techniques on how to de-stress, how to perceive the world differently, how to interact with others a little differently, because mindset is where everything starts. And then we're going to build on that, and we're going to talk about, okay, now we're going to stress ourselves out and learn how to relax our stress response. So that's pillar 2. And then we're going to move over here to the cold, where we're going to add an external stressor and learn how to relax and de-stress. So like each one of the pillars builds on itself.
So that makes sense. So when you're talking about down regulating, so let's go back to our entry level cold shower in the morning, where we're trying to calm ourselves with a slow, calm breathing. Any thoughts on breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, or all nasal, or box breathing, or where do you like people to start, or what should they consider?
Nasal breathing, just because it's a great place to start. Like even in Wim's technique, like he talks about mouth breathing a little bit, and it's only when you're trying to elicit a stressful response. So if we breathe in through our mouth, we tend to go into the chest, whereas the nose is going to breathe into the belly, where we get full oxygenation, and it's going to trigger that relaxation response. So we want to make sure that if you're practicing cold showers, start focusing on the nasal breathing to start, and then just nice smooth breath in and smooth breaths out. And that's it.
Awesome. And I think I've talked about this before, but there's a lot of people that are really into breath work that suggest, when you're working out, and maybe these are some of the times where you can work on your nasal breathing. And it might be through the set, or it might be, you're huffing and puffing on a hard set or a sprint, and then you immediately shift into forcing that nasal breathing, right? Our inclination may be to gasp for air, but then we're just gasping. We may not be getting as much oxygen, but especially for first responders, I think I found it to be a very helpful practice, where even if I'm lifting pretty heavy and I'm really out of breath at the end of my set or superset, if I force myself just to nasal breathe, I can down regulate way quicker. I can get back ready for my next set, which is exactly what we want. If you're tackling somebody, wrestling, getting them into cuffs, that, that scuffle that feels like minutes, but it was probably 25 seconds. You want to be able to shift back in. And I do see, oftentimes we all see those that are in better shape, those that are more experienced, better trained, they do shift quickly because it's just not so much of an external stress stimulus to go through that stint of things.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Like real world applicability to breathing. I remember the first time I used it, I was in a scuffle with a suspect. A couple things happen, right? When you start to get like maybe a little bit of tunnel vision, the heart rate elevates, like all those physiological responses. But if you can take a half a moment to be like, I need to relax my breath, which a half a moment in that situation is like an hour, it feels like, but you can actually rein in your own physiology and focus on like what needs to be done. Okay, like, are there people around me? What do I have to do to actually subdue this suspect? And so take a half a moment and learn how to control that breath work in the moment. Also, if that fight goes a long time where you're back up maybe like, 5, 10, 15 minutes away, what that's going to do is allow you to stay in the fight longer because you're not exhausting all your resources. So even if you're evenly matched with that suspect or let's say less matched than that suspect, but he doesn't understand how to control his own physiology, if you can wait that out, we see it a lot with Muhammad Ali did it with the rope-a-dope, right? Just let George Foreman tire himself out.
Yeah.
And I know that's not a great tactic, so I'm not like telling people this is like train jujitsu, like
hear the metaphor there.
Yeah. But if it's a situation where you come into where you find yourself overmatched, learning how to control yourself to not burn out as fast may eventually, if you can hang on and survive, it may give you the upper hand after a few minutes when that suspect gasses out.
No, that's a great example. And I just this popped in my mind, right, where we have a lot of young cops out there and some of them are doing a great job, trying to de-escalate. So it's, verbal commands. But it is because it's newer, it's a stressful response. I'm watching body cam and there's, a guy in a foot pursuit and he's yelling like, get on the ground, you're under arrest. Like, cool. You yell it a couple times, or maybe rather than yell it, like you call it out at a, high volume a couple times. And then what I asked that guy to do is like, hey, good job. Consider how much oxygen you're using up and like saving that, right? Like you're doing right by him, you're doing right by the public that may be watching or the body cam, but like you've given your legal lawful warnings more than once. Now, like he's continuing to run. Let's not keep yelling 4 or 5 times, because by the time you grab him, yeah, it's like you've just expended all this oxygen and energy just yelling and running, which is like super difficult to do. I think the last time most of us practice doing that is like academy, where you're doing a mock foot pursuit and actually calling things out. It's tough, right? So any opportunity to practice this breath work, right, getting back into parasympathetic, as I would kind of conceptualize it, like getting the most oxygen you can, even practicing nasal breathing as you're walking around, like a brisk walk around the block. Like that's a perfect opportunity where you can feel, myself personally, I can feel myself starting to get a little uncomfortable doing that. You want to start taking a deep breath and you try to keep pushing the pace and just keeping it nasal. But that's aiding that kind of response.
It definitely is. And one of the things to consider for law enforcement, this is especially applicable to any firefighters that might be listening, your CO2 tolerance is very important. So our CO2, when it rises in the body, that's like our trigger to breathe, right? So if we have a low CO2 tolerance, that means that we're not getting as much oxygenation as we could because we're eliciting a more rapid respiratory rate. So like doing exactly what you just described, walking around, slowing our breathing, breath holding after like a hard set, or box breathing, nasal breathing, they're all trying to accomplish the same thing. And it's to get ourselves to slow down a little bit. And if we can slow our natural respiratory rate by improving our CO2 tolerance, then we can improve performance when it actually counts.
I love that. This just popped in my mind, but part of why I started practicing, I was talking about walking around the block briskly, and I started practicing breath holds as I was walking. It's been a little bit, but just walking the dog, and I'll just hold my breath for an extended amount of time and then really slowly exhale and really slowly inhale again. And it's a struggle. Like you feel really uncomfortable. But it was actually a suggestion from my doc because in my early 20s, I got diagnosed with sleep apnea, which is super rare, I suppose, for being an Asian guy that was in good cardiovascular shape. But it was never enough to recommend any sort of like CPAP or anything. But because I've been like grinding my teeth, probably because of high stress, because of the job and all that, my doc was actually like, hey, you know what? Like since you have had these mild apneas back in the past, like consider working on your breath work and your breath holds so you're not waking up because you have just a brief shortage of oxygen. Have you heard of anything like that, or does that make sense, align with what you've been learning and training?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Again, we want to make sure that we're doing a couple things. We want to strengthen the jaw a little bit. So if you're walking around realizing like you're holding your breath or like your mouth's open while you're sitting at a desk or out and about, to make sure we close our mouth. Because I mean, whether we're talking about mental resilience or physical change, like everything's really about repetition and habits. So we want to make sure that we're doing all the things that we can control. So making sure that our mouth's closed while we're sleeping at night. I know mouth taping is kind of like a thing that's
Yep.
come up,
I'm
yeah,
doing it.
recently,
I'm
right?
doing it. Yeah.
And I started practicing it, and I'm sleeping better. But it's
Mm-hmm.
training my jaw to stay a little bit more closed during the day. And then, yeah, training our CO2 response and making sure that we're slowing our natural respiratory rate so we're not having difficulty at night, which is going to translate into better sleep, better recovery, better hormone balance, and then, start the day off on a better note, just from just training our breathing a little bit.
Yeah. I love that, man. We covered a lot of ground, and I want to be mindful of your time, but is there anything that we're missing? We talked a lot about, well, a lot of things, but what else would you leave the listeners with to think about?
Practice cold exposure safely. Longer is not always better. Colder is not always better. And one of the great ways to tell is if you're getting out and you kind of have the shakes a little bit, you're probably been in a little too long. I'm also very conservative when I teach as well because I've seen the negatives. So just make sure we're not pushing the envelope. Highly recommend if you can get to a class in your area. One, not only is it great for just your knowledge base, but the community around WIM is truly amazing. And, I have 60 other instructors that I went through with that we still talk almost every day, 2 years later. It's a great practice and a great group of people. So yeah, if you figure out how to do it safely, and if you could find a community around it, it's so much better.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up again.
Yeah.
Right, safety first.
Yeah.
Let's not do breath holds in and underwater without appropriate safety precautions, buddy system, what have you. Let's not do the extreme cold where you're out in the river by yourself and you're going to get hypothermia. Yeah, let's be mindful of those things. With that, so for the cold showers again, another question popped up. Is there efficacy on getting the water on your head, face, chest, or is it just kind of all over? Do you try to flip around?
I try to flip around, and as far as I'm aware, there's not any studies done to show like it needs to be specifically here. I think with the shower, it's most difficult because you're trying to get it all over the place,
Yeah.
right? The ice baths are much better for that. Which, I want to bring up this point. There's a reason why we do ice baths up to the clavicle. And so I see so many people online like just getting the waist in, and they're kind of like arms out.
Yeah.
60% of our pain receptors is in the upper half of our body, and we're trying to hit as many of those as we can because we're trying to elicit that response that we're looking for in order to build that mitochondrial health, in order to build that mental resilience, and the way to get that is to fully submerge.
Yeah. No, that's a good point because you're 100% true, right? Like when you're in the shower, once you get situated, if it's all on your front, you're like, okay, cool, I got this, and you kind of mellow out into it. But man, the moment you like flip around, it's like you're almost starting over. So definitely some benefits to dunking, or getting in some sort of a plunge situation from my experience. I have not gotten up to the point of this, but maybe it's something I can work on this fall, winter, but where people do the contrast, right? Where they get cold, they get comfortable, and then they go to warm, hot, and then that feels really good. And then they got to go back in and like, yeah, you're nodding, grinning. So
it's, I love contrast therapy. It's such a cool feeling to like volley back and forth. I put together like a men's retreat in Colorado this last winter, and we had a hot tub on site, and like, dude, it was like we'd get in the hot tub, and then one by one, everybody get in the cold back in the hot tub, and it was a really cool experience.
Yeah, that's fun. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much, Adam. please, if there's any final thoughts, and then where people can find you and get in contact with you.
Yeah, again, thank you for having me on. Dude, it was awesome to be here today. Again, please practice safely. I know people are just kind of putting plunges in their departments with zero training. It doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal to not put your guys through a safety class, but as demonstrated by a couple hospital visits, it would just be like if you started deadlifting without the proper instruction on how to deadlift. It's not a huge difference, but there's a difference. And if you want to contact me, whether through questions or whatever it is, you can find me at soulfultraining.com, or I'm on Instagram, soulful_training. Those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Adam. Appreciate it. And clearly, I was super curious and I've learned a ton. So I'm excited. And my commitment to the audience is like, I'm going to get back into some cold showers. So as everyone's like getting more warmed up and like comfort food, it's like, no, it's time to get uncomfortable so we can grow and keep challenging ourselves that way too.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.